Ah, dang it, this isn't the mess hall. Ah, dang it, this isn't the Playboy Mansion. Ah, dang it, this isn't Kentucky Fried Chicken. I've lost all ideas, folks, at this point. Hello, interwebs, and welcome to my review of Star Trek Discovery Season 3, Episode 6, Scavengers. I don't know what that was, but that's how I'm saying the title. I don't know why. But yes, welcome to my review. As always, I'm going to be giving you my spoiler-free thoughts up front, and then we're going to dive right into spoilers in the nitty-gritty of the episode after that. So, what are my spoiler-free thoughts? Well, I will say the A-plot of this episode, while not bad, felt pretty standard. It's kind of without getting too much into spoilers, exactly what you really think this type of plot would be. It's kind of a breaking someone out of a prison sort of situation. And really nothing particularly fascinating or interesting happens within that plot. There are some interesting world-building moments that I'll talk about in my spoiler section that I really liked how it started fleshing out a little bit more of what this post the Burn Federation looks like. So I liked those little hints that came with the A-plot of this episode. But generally, it wasn't a bad story by any means. I didn't hate it. There was nothing that, like last episode, that spoke out to me as like, oh, extra egregious or confused me or I didn't quite get or I didn't think worked as well. It didn't get to the depths of my problems with last episode, but everything felt kind of like, okay, this is fine. Nothing crazy. However, that all being said, the B and the C plots, and even some of these smaller moments sprinkled throughout the A plot, were A+. As always, especially with this season, Star Trek Discovery lives and breathes on its small character moments, and I think that the small character moments throughout this episode are excellent, like truly excellent, like some of my favorite of the season so far, which is really saying something because I really think the show has done a great job of giving us those really strong, meaningful, and meaty character beats throughout the entire season. So for me to say that this episode has some of my favorite of those moments is truly going above and beyond. But in terms of the actual plot of the episode, it's fine. But the final thing that I really want to focus in on this episode that I really enjoyed and actually I really appreciated the writer's nuanced approach to this is that the writers are really taking to heart the criticism surrounding the character of Michael Burnham. Without getting into too many spoilery specifics, this episode really, and we've kind of seen hints of it throughout this season, but this episode really specifically honed in on a lot of the criticisms that have been leveled against Michael Burnham's characters and some of the problems that a lot of people have had with her development as a character and how she's been portrayed, and actually delving into them and actually giving those problems consequences and dealing with them. But what I liked about it was that it wasn't a complete retcon of Michael Burnham's character. It wasn't saying like, okay, we've seen these criticisms, so we're just going to shift her and make it not about make her character not do those things anymore. We'll just sort of ignore that was ever part of her character. No, the show actually takes those elements of her character and starts addressing them head on. And I really appreciated Discovery for doing that because it would have been so easy for them to just wholesale ignore the problems and just say, okay, Michael Burnham's this way, especially when they did that whole year-long jump earlier in the season. You could have just said, yeah, she's changed now. We don't need to get into the nitty-gritty of analyzing all the problems that we've had with her character over the previous seasons of the show. They could have easily done that, but they didn't do that here. And so I'm really liking that the show is calling it out in many ways, and most especially in this episode. And I just greatly appreciate them for that. So those are my general spoiler thoughts. Sort of standard in terms of the plot, but great character moments and great actually giving us consequences for previous mistakes and issues that the show has had, and really showing that the Discovery writers are always about taking constructive criticism and trying to grow the show and moving forward, but without ignoring their past mistakes, which is kind of something that this whole season as a whole has been about like dealing with past traumas, dealing with past mistakes, but pushing forward and doing better through them. So I'm liking that the show is doing that both within a meta level for their own sort of writing stories throughout the past few seasons, and actually within the themes and plot of the story itself. So it feels like it's doing this on so many different levels that I just really think it's a really strong episode on the back of that. But overall, not my favorite episode of the season, but I really don't have anything negative to say about it. I just only have a few things that I'm just sort of like okay with, and everything else I thought was really solid. But that's really everything that I can say without delving too much into spoilers here. So if you haven't seen the episode, episode. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. If you haven't seen the episode yet, go watch the episode. I'll still be here when you're done, and we can jump into our spoilers. So, as usual, I'm going to go scene by scene and break down every single element of this episode and everything that I have to say about it. So let's dive into our very first scene, where we see that the USS Discovery has gotten all those big, fancy, smancy 31st century updates, including those detached nacelles, which I'm glad they actually explained to us. I was actually thinking about this just a couple days ago when I was thinking about the new ships that we saw last episode in episode 5, where they mentioned, they have detached nacelles. And I sort of sat there for a minute and thought about it. It's like, why would you want detached nacelles? That just seems unnecessary. And I get it looks kind of cool and futuristic, but I wasn't entirely sure what the reasoning was for that. And so I liked that in this episode at the top, they kind of gave us an explanation. It allows for more maneuverability. And the nacelles aren't completely detached because they can come back together pretty easily with programmable matter. Now, I probably could sit here and think about some problems with that in terms of maybe, you could easily lose your nacelles or something like that. I'm not entirely sure. I'm sure someone who's more into the nitty gritty of analyzing battle tactics and ships and things like that could tell you if it's a good idea or a bad idea to have removable nacelles. But at least for me, it worked as an explanation, and I liked that they gave us an explanation because on the face of it, it was a tad confusing why they would even exist. But at least this gives me some sort of plausible thought processes behind doing that. So like that here. But then we get a really, really wonderful scene with Saru and the rest of the Starfleet Admiralty. And I really, really adored this scene. It did surprise me that it's been 3 weeks and the rest of the Admiralty hadn't learned about Discovery up until this point, and sort of Saru bringing it up and the Admiral sort of stating things. So I found that a little bit strange, but generally as a whole, in terms of the actual nitty-gritty of the meeting and the beat-by-beat play of it, I thought it worked great. It was nice to see Starfleet doing its thing and saying hey, even in the worst possible moment, even in, Starfleet's downgraded and can't really do as much as it used to do in its heyday, they're still focused on trying to, do the right thing, keep control. They're still very professional. They still got things handled, even if they can't always do so with the same resources that they've always had throughout their history that we're used to as Star Trek fans. So I really like that it wasn't we're screwing things up or we're not really good or we're scrappy. It's no, they are still professionals. Great job there. I also really liked the reference to the Le Guin, as in the Ursula Le Guin ship. I think that was great. Ursula Le Guin is one of my favorite authors of all time. Really enjoyed that Easter egg. I thought that was very, very touching. Easily one of my favorite writers. If you haven't read Earthsea, go read the Earthsea books. Some of my personal favorites. In fact, I'm going to be doing a video on Earthsea in the beginning of next year because fantastic series. I also like the scene that sort of sets up where Saru's going to go throughout the episode, but I like that it shows Saru being a professional, taking part in these big missions and these big discussions and doing his part and actually being a presence there and a professional presence. So great job there. The only question I really have is why do they have the old Discovery uniform still? They got the new badges, but they still have the blue and gold uniforms, which to be fair, I like a little bit better. The gray ones look kind of cool, but they read a little bit Nazi-ish, which I don't think is the intention by the costume designers, but I don't really like gray uniforms. They just kind of give me that kind of factor. But so I like the blue and gold much better, but I am curious why logistically they are keeping it within the canon of the show. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate it because I like those uniforms better, but I just don't understand why that's actually happening. But then we get to one of my favorite scenes in the episode, which is Sciencegasm Volume 2, where we get to see all the lower upper decks crew members. What are we calling the bridge crew members that don't get a lot of lines? I'm calling them lower decks, upper decks. That's not a mouthful at all. But anyways, I like that we get to see the lower decks characters on the bridge get to have this moment, getting to science-gasm out about all the new nitty-gritty tech and everything going on. And the moment where, Detmer's do we really need this? And what's his name? Bryce says, oh, hell yeah, we do. And just, geeking out about the programmable matter. And Owo just sort of saying it's like glass. And I like that sort of tactile feel that they sort of gave us as the viewers through Owo. So great job there. I thought that was a really fun scene. And I really like the recurring gag that comes up throughout the episode that Linus is teleporting with his new badge because the new badges can basically do everything. That he's just making mistakes and teleporting to different places and he teleports onto the captain's chair. That was a great little running gag. There's nothing much more to say about it. I just thought it was funny. But then Book's ship shows up with Grudge as the only passenger on it, which I thought was another funny moment, just Grudge being the one that appears on the view screen. That was kind of funny. But then we basically get this scene between Burnham and Saru where we learn that Book was going after a black box that Burnham had been searching for because she's trying to look for a point of origin for the burn and kind of can backtrace it based on where different ships were and when they exploded at the exact moment of when they exploded. Cool idea. I like that concept into how they can triangulate the point of origin. It's a clever conceit for that thought process. I will say I do have some thoughts about this burn mystery that we have going on here, but I'll save it a little bit towards the end when it becomes a little bit more relevant to my thoughts on the burn. But anyways, I like the concept of the point of origin and how that sort of works out. But there creates this interesting conflict between Burnham and Saru, or Saru's like, look, we need to stay around here. We've been ordered to possibly have to deal with this Andorian Orion Syndicate problem that may be coming up. So we can't go anywhere. You cannot go after Book. And Burnham basically saying, I really want to, and her kind of feeling guilty and really feeling the need to go after her kind of pseudo boyfriend. So this gets into what I was talking about in my spoiler-free section, in that when I was watching the scene, I was getting really, really frustrated at Burnham here. Even though I think it fits exactly with the type of character that we've seen her to be, not only in this season, but throughout the show. She's the character who, like, she has an idea, she thinks she knows what's right, and so she's going to do it without following the chain of command, chain of command be damned. And so that fits her, but I got really frustrated at her character in the scene, but I like that Saru called her out, and that was something that we saw seeded in last episode, but really coming to loggerheads here, that Saru is calling out Burnham's problems. As I said again in my spoiler-free section, one of the things I was worried about is that they were going to use this year-long absence that Burnham had to say, like, oh, she's gotten over the problems that you had with her as a character. But I'm liking that, no, she's kind of gotten worse in those characteristics. And we're going to start analyzing and calling them out, because Burnham has always been a character that people have been frustrated with while watching the show. I didn't have as big a problem with it, because I always kind of bought why she chose to do the things that she did. But some people criticized her, like, breaking the chain of command all the time. Here in this episode, though, it did frustrate me because it was so clearly the wrong choice, and because she was doing it against a character that we've come to love and care about and think is a good captain in Saru. So I like that we can kind of see both sides there, but we understand, at least for me, where Saru's coming from a little bit more, because he is right. He is seeing the bigger picture, and Burnham's kind of being a little bit selfish here. And it also kind of ties into my feelings on the burn, which I will talk about again at the end. So I like this sort of analysis of her character where we can understand both where they're coming from. It fits their characters as we've seen them throughout the entire history of the show, but we also know who is more right here, and that is Saru. Again, at least that's my reading of it. But then Burnham decides to go off with Georgiou to rescue Book. And since this is the point in the episode where the story is kind of split into different directions, I'll kind of focus on each story individually. And I'll start with the Burnham-Georgiou going to rescue Book storyline, because that's the one I honestly have the least to say about. As I said in my spoiler-free section, this plot of, like, Georgiou and Burnham going to rescue Book kind of plays out exactly how you would expect it to. They show up, there's the big pirate guy that they're trying to trick and make them think that they're traitors, trying to get in there when they're really trying to rescue Book and get the black box stuff. They are able to trick them, but there's a couple, hitches in the plan, but they eventually get them out anyways, and everyone's fairly fine. Overall, it's kind of a paint-by-numbers version of that plot, and I don't have much to speak about it. There's some little bits and pieces that I think were interesting, though. I did like Georgiou's interaction with the guy. I think just seeing her in her element and kind of getting to play off of the Orion guy was fairly interesting. Speaking of the Orion guy, I liked the sort of building out of the Orion Syndicate world, or the Orion Andorian Syndicate world, that there's this character named Osira, who is sort of running this syndicate, and we've seen the Admiral mention this character a few other times, so I'm sure Osira is going to be an important character at some point, at least come into the plot a little bit more directly later on in the series. So I like that we're getting sort of seedings of this character here, in sort of the background element of being an important figurehead in this Orion Andorian Syndicate story. So liking that little bit. I'm also glad that we got to see a Bajoran on the show. We've seen a couple references to Bajorans here, like the Bajoran Exchange. They've obviously spread out into the galaxy between where we saw them in Deep Space Nine to now. And so I'm liking that we get to see another Bajoran character here who quickly dies, which is upsetting, and pretty gruesomely too. The scene where he's sort of like the Orion guy is, being evil, and tells him to run. He runs through that fence thing and it blows up his head, which is a particularly gruesome way for him to be killed. But effective in sort of showing us the stakes and what they needed to get through. I'm sure some people will be like, that's a bit too gruesome, but I think at this point we just all kind of have to accept that, modern day Star Trek, especially live action modern day Star Trek, is going to be a little bit more gory than we're used to. Generally, I don't have a big problem with gore, but I can certainly understand why other people would. But for me, generally, I don't really have all that much of a hesitance when I see gore. So it was kind of fine, but I did kind of say, like, oof, that was a bit bit much for what you're trying to get across. And the only other major thing that I'll mention in this is the Andorian guy, Rin. I liked his sort of backstory, this idea that he was this guy who tried to lead a rebellion of the workers to go against this Osira character. But Osira just sort of made an example of him by cutting off his antennae. And sort of made him do like the thing that everyone hates and like, mess with the thing on the back of the head that makes them explode if they go past the fence, stuff like that. I like that idea. It was a very cool idea and shows how brutal this Osira character and how like sort of mentally messed up that he's able to play and like really screw with people and sort of make this like example of this guy. However, the end of the episode when, Rin gets killed and everything, or not gets killed, I guess he just takes a hit for Book when they're trying to escape, I thought was fine, but I didn't really feel for the guy. I think it's because he didn't really feel like much of a character. He was just sort of an example of what could happen and sort of the brutality of this system. But I didn't really feel like he was much of a character. There's nothing really to hook me into really caring about him. To give a good example, way back in episode 2 of this season, there was that guy that we met in the bar who gets killed by the bad guy of that episode. And I actually felt more for that kid when he was killed by the bad guy in that episode. The guy back in that sort of like Western bar-ish place. I forget the guy's name, but he gets killed in that scene. The guy was like reprogramming the program will matter for Tilly. I think you get it. You know who I'm talking about at this point. Anyways, I felt more for him because we got a little bit of his character. We saw that he like cared about the Federation, kind of wanted to get out of his situation, was kind of inspired. I got a little hint of who this person was. Whereas with Rin, I didn't really get a sense of like him as a person. Like I got that he felt annoyed and bad that he was sort of a pariah, but I didn't get like why he led the rebellion in the first place or really kind of what he felt specifically about his situation, because there's like, of course, all of us would feel like really terrible in that situation, but there's nothing really specific to really tie me into like caring about him as a character specifically. So when he like takes the hit for Book, I was like, yeah, that's fun. It's okay. I kind of figured that would happen. I mean, maybe he'll be coming back in future episodes because he didn't die by the end of the episode, so it'd be interesting to develop him further as a character. But in terms of this episode, he was functional, but I didn't really care all that much for him. And then the last thing I'll mention with this storyline is Georgiou sort of having the PTSD flashbacks, which we're seeing some sort of stuff with her back in the Terran Empire. So clearly there's some sort of memory PTSD trauma thing going on, which seems to be a theme throughout the season of trauma and memory and how those things interact with each other. But clearly it's instigated in some way by Kovac, the David Cronenberg character from last episode. So I'm curious to see where they're going to go with that. But I'm liking this sort of idea of memory and trauma that's sort of been weaving its way throughout the season. Now, again, I'll be bringing that up a little bit later on in this episode. But I like the moment where Burnham sort of comes to Georgiou and says, hey, Georgiou, what are you, you can trust me. You can open up. It's okay. This isn't the Terran Empire. You can open up. And I like that Georgiou doesn't say, oh, I get it. Yeah, it's all no, she would push back and say, look, I've been burned, no pun intended, by someone who looked like you before, and that's made me reticent to want to trust anybody. It felt true to her character and also true to Burnham, and it was a nice moment where you could kind of see her starting to open up, but not being able to fully do so. So I thought that was a very true to the character's moment that I think worked very well and kind of hit at these themes of trust that have been, again, another theme that's sort of been interweaving itself throughout the season. Trust and trauma and memory, all kind of like coming up throughout the season. So that's about all I have to say on that storyline. But let's dive into the next one that I really, really loved. And it was only, I think, like 2 or 3 scenes throughout the episode that we got between Stamets, Adira, and Gray. As we saw, Adira is still seeing memories of Gray and her dead boyfriend and the ex-host of her symbiote, Tal. So she's still seeing elements of him. And I liked that Gray was calling out Adira and saying, like, look, you can't just focus in on your job. You can't just focus in on your work. You need to break yourself out, form new memories, like make connections with people. Again, another theme of this season, like making connections, reaching out to other people, trusting other people. So I'm liking that there's these recurring themes coming out in different ways here. There's the wonderful scene, and another one of my favorite scenes of the episode is when Adira is talking to Gray in the mess hall. Stamets sees this and goes over and talks to Adira. And I love the way this scene is played. It's not one of those like, all right, you're acting kind of crazy. But Stamets just completely accepts everything that Adira has to say. Now, obviously, they've been through a lot. People like Hugh Culber have come back from the dead. So I get that he would be more accepting of this crazy stuff. But it really felt honestly refreshing for a show. There's too often in almost every single show, but especially in science fiction, there's like crazy stuff happens and people are like, oh, that's strange, weird. Wow, that's so weird and awkward and it feels different. And so we see that trope even within Star Trek. Almost every single Star Trek is like, oh, you're acting weird and strange because of some weird sci-fi thing. But I love that Stamets just sits and listens and accepts every single piece of what Adira has to say. That is, again, it's kind of speaking a little bit to the LGBTQ and queer community in numerous ways, because a lot of what the queer community and LGBTQ community kind of talks about and handles within our community is like, when you come out, when you're feeling these complex feelings about your identity, you just need someone to listen and accept you and not judge any of it. Just sort of be there to listen to you. And so I like that that's coming out between these two, members of the LGBTQ community, with Stamets obviously being gay, and, Adira, as we know, will eventually be coming out as non-binary at some point in the series, and Gray also being trans as well, so adding him into the mix. But again, not explicitly making it about that. It's not about Adira coming out as non-binary explicitly. It's about Adira handling the death of her boyfriend, and Stamets kind of being fully accepting of the weirdness of that situation without any judgment. So I really, really, really appreciated that emotional honesty and depth and sort of a metaphorical representation of how the queer community handles this sort of stuff. And I'm not saying that's exclusive to the queer community, but it's something that, as a member of the queer community, watching these queer characters, it was just something that I resonated really specifically with me. But also, I also really loved that Stamets was able to make this connection with Adira and saying, hey, I've lost someone too, and so I don't really see things as a beginning as an end. We hold on to people, we connect to people. It makes sense that he would make that connection because of his death, seeing Culber's death, and also seeing Culber coming back to life, and sort of seeing this ebbs and flows of what life and death really means. Beautiful, beautiful scene between the two of them. And it's capped off by another really beautiful scene between Stamets and Culber in the bedroom, where they're sort of talking about his experience with Adira. And I'm really liking that we're starting to see a little bit of a softening of Stamets. Stamets has been this guy who has been very ego-driven, kind of standoffish, and kind of a jerk throughout the entire show. I've always kind of liked him because I've always liked the jerk, egotistical science type character. I mean, Rodney McKay is one of my favorite characters on Stargate, for example. Also the Doctor on Voyager. So I always kind of like the stuck-up, like tech nerdy kind of person. But a lot of people, he's rubbed them the wrong way. And so I like that he's kind of softening a little bit through his relationship with Adira. And I really like that he opens up to Culber, too, about like, hey, it was rough watching you die. And I was able to connect with her because I had that situation that I dealt with you. And Culber just sort of fully accepting that. I'm really loving the chemistry between Stamets and Culber this season. And the last thing I'll mention on this storyline, because I really love this whole storyline, even though it was very, very short throughout the episode, but there's a lot to dig into, as is obvious. I will just say I am loving Blue Del Barrio and Ian Alexander. I am loving the energy they bring to the show. Ian Alexander is great from what little we've seen of him throughout the show, but Blue Del Barrio, who plays Adira, they are knocking it out of the park. I cannot speak highly enough about how much I love Adira's energy and Blue Del Barrio's energy that they bring to the character. Great acting job. Just small little moments where Blue Del Barrio is just so casual and is just has a lot of like fun witticisms and fun little character beats that feel very true and very human, to use probably an incorrect term. So great acting job by Blue Del Barrio throughout every episode they've been in, but specifically here, there's some small little touches in their performance that I really, really enjoyed. But then the final storyline we get is the Saru and Tilly and Burnham kind of trifecta scene going on here, where Tilly learns that Burnham, left the ship. Saru goes down to talk to Tilly about it, and I love that scene between Saru and Tilly, where Saru just kind of says, I thought maybe Burnham would come to you and talk to you about this, and Tilly's saying no, she didn't, and I think that you should go tell the Admiral. And I like that honesty here. Again, going back to this idea of like holding Burnham accountable for the mistakes of her character and really her flaws in her character, and really kind of showing that through line. I think it was a really beautiful scene between Saru and Tilly. And honestly, that's been a relationship this season that I did not expect, but I'm really liking every scene between Saru and Tilly that I've seen throughout this show. And there was a couple in season 2, but really think it's their relationship is really shining throughout this season. And I thought this scene was really beautiful, and I like that Tilly says, I would probably have made the same choice that she would have made, and Saru saying, no, I don't think you would have. Again, feels, Tilly trying to be loyal to Burnham in what way she can while still acknowledging that Burnham needs to be held accountable and sort of saying that to Saru kind of needs to hear it. But Saru also being like, no, I don't think you will. And having that sort of more captain mindset of like, he understands his crew members and understands where their lines and limits are. It just really shows an intention on his part. And maybe he has a blind spot for Burnham, but elsewhere he really does understand the personalities of his crew members. And I like that that's shown through a brilliant scene between Tilly and Saru that I deeply, deeply enjoyed. But then we get Saru telling the Admiral that Burnham's gone rogue. It was kind of a standard scene. It was just sort of like, hey, we're going to do this. And then they kind of yada that they didn't have to go to this jump mission thing. I appreciated that it was sort of like a ticking clock kind of deal going on throughout the episode. But it was really just there to like show like Burnham couldn't have gone to rescue Book if she had wanted to. And so they kind of just forget it. They don't even really address it. It just kind of comes up in a conversation that they didn't have to go at one point. But then we get Burnham coming back with Book and them finally kissing, which I really, really liked. In fact, I was literally writing in the scenes like, oh my gosh, just kiss. That was in my notes. And then Linus interrupts the kiss. And I'm like, oh my God, why? I literally wrote in my notes, like, why are they dragging this out? It's like, why are they playing coy with Burnham and Book being an item? We all know they're going to be an item. And then they finally kiss. So I like that kind of fake out. I was like, oh, I was so frustrated when Linus came in. I was like, just break out, dang it. I was very aggressive. I'm sorry. Like, I just want him to kiss so bad. I don't know why I'm getting so aggressive about it, but I was just very much wanting them to kiss. Linus interrupting, got so frustrated, and then they finally just made out. I thought that was a fun little, playing with our expectations a little bit and paying off the Linus joke in a really fun way. So, good scene on there. I'm finally glad they're together because their chemistry has just been so... You could just tell that they were going to bone. From the second they first had a scene together, we knew that they were going to bone at some point. So, I'm surprised they didn't in the year that they were there. So, I'm finally glad that we're seeing that actually happen because I would have been so frustrated if they dragged that out even further. It's already even felt like it's dragged out a little bit too much as it is. So I'm glad that we're finally at the boning phase, which apparently, considering how aggressive I got about it, is something I've been very much wanting. I didn't even realize it. But then we get another really excellent scene at the end of this episode between the Admiral, Saru, and Burnham. And I love the Admiral in this scene. I had a few reservations with how he was portrayed last episode that I think some other people didn't have. But for me, I kind of had a few... I thought he was a little bit inconsistent in how he was characterized. But here, he was spot on. I agreed with everything that he had to say. He's like, he even called out Saru in a way that I didn't really think about. He would have said, he's like, Saru, if you had come to me with this information up front, I might have said you could go, Burnham. I might have judged it, but I didn't have that intel, and you didn't tell me. And I didn't even think about that. But it makes perfect sense that he should have gone to the Admiral at that point and told him that they had this intel about the black box and that Booker was in this situation. And so if they had just trusted the Admiral, again, that theme of trust coming up here, it might have all worked out fine. It did kind of work out fine, but it almost didn't. And so I like that he called out Saru in that scene in a way that I didn't even think about, but makes perfect sense. But then when he goes after Burnham, it's like, okay, every single thing that people have been frustrated with, and I've been frustrated within her character of the season. Again, I didn't have as much problem with her in previous seasons, but clearly some people did, and the writers of the show are just are directing focus to that and doing so in a way that even I kind of understand, and I'm thinking she deserves this from the Admiral within this season, even if I didn't necessarily agree. If that had come up in previous seasons, I don't think I would have agreed, but I think I agree with it 100% here. Is like he calls her out, and I love that Burnham just knows everything he's gonna say, and he's like, correct. And you just see his like just barely holding back fury at that moment. Great job throughout that scene. You would be thrown in the brig. It's a little bit of a get out of jail free card where he's like, you would be in the brig if you hadn't saved lives. I still think she probably should have been thrown in the brig even if she had saved lives. So I understand the show's kind of playing a little bit fast and loose with the rules there. But you could also say that Starfleet's undermanned and understaffed, so they need every able-bodied person. So he just knows, like, all right, I'm gonna give you one more chance here. But I appreciated everything that he had to say. But I have two more things that I want to bring up about the scene, and I'll start with the negative one, and then I'll end on the positive one. The negative one that I have is that Burnham makes this speech to the Admiral about, like, I don't believe that if the Federation doesn't learn about the burn, then the Federation will never be able to heal. They'll never be able to move past this if the burn mystery doesn't get solved. And thematically, I like that. I like that sort of ties into this, again, this sort of recurring idea of memory and trauma that has been running throughout the season. This idea that if we don't deal with past trauma, past issues, and don't try to solve them and reconcile them in a way that we can handle with our identity, that we won't be able to move forward. That's been a recurring theme, and that is in large degree how trauma kind of works. That trauma is all about sort of reconfiguring and coming to terms with something traumatic that happened to you that you can't really define into your identity, but just having to accept it and moving past it. But the process is how we sort of handle like PTSD and trauma and coming to terms with that, if we ever do come to terms with it. So that is kind of getting at that idea. I can't really judge it in terms of like its handling of the theme of trauma until I see the whole season play out and sort of see where that eventually goes. So I like it thematically, and I'm putting an asterisk into, my judgment of that by the time I see how the season ends. However, I disagree with it plot-wise in the moment, because I don't really feel as a plot point that it's all that compelling and really feeling like it's enough to push forward a narrative. The burn happened 100 years ago. And while I like the thematic trauma idea of it, at some point it's like, I don't really care what happened 100 years ago. I care about what's happening right now. And while the mystery is kind of interesting, I am curious to know who did it. If there's no like real, important thing that's going on with it right now, like maybe another burn is going to happen if they don't do something about it or don't learn about who caused it. If there's no like current impetus, it's just kind of like, okay, it's a mystery, I guess. I'm interested, but I don't really care all that much in terms of like it being the thing that pushes the plot forward. So I'm interested, but I don't care all that much as it being a main instigator, the main mystery box of the season. So I don't want to wholesale knock it off, because I am curious about it. I do find the burn interesting. I just don't necessarily find it compelling, if you can see the distinction there. So I don't necessarily know if I agree with Burnham here. And maybe that'll be brought up later on in the episode. They've shown they're willing to be critical of things that Burnham says, and that not everything that she says is taken wholesale. But I'm also meant to feel like that was supposed to be this inspiring speech at the end of the episode. Like the Admiral's certainly kind of like, oh yeah, and maybe she's got a little bit of something right to say there. So I feel like the ending speeching of it at the end of the episode was supposed to make me feel like, yeah, Burnham's right in this. And I don't know if I necessarily agree. I don't necessarily know if I agree with the show. So I am getting a little bit frustrated with, I just need the burn to feel a little bit more compelling for me to really buy into it. So that's my one kind of frustration with that end scene. But to end on a positive, I really like the scene between Burnham and Saru, where Saru says, like, look, I wanted things to go back to normal so badly that I didn't see the warning signs in front of me, and I need to knock you down in rank. That idea of wanting to return to normal, but understanding that normal isn't a thing that we can have anymore, really resonates today in 2020. I know they wrote this before all the pandemic stuff going on, but that idea just really hit me hard and felt very true of like the wanting to return to normalcy, but understanding like we can't get back to normal, and nor will we ever maybe get back to normal. That really hit me hard. Even if that wasn't intended by the writers at the time, I think that they hit upon something really, really true in that moment. And him sort of demoting her in rank really felt again true to his character, but you understood how hard it was for him to say that. I think Doug Jones delivered that really powerfully. But so you knew he was doing the right thing, as Burnham says, but you felt how much that hurt him to do it. So I just knockout performance by Doug Jones in the final moments of the episode there. So I do want to end on that positive. So that's basically all my thoughts on this episode. As I stated, and it should be clear, considering the fact that I spent more time discussing the side stuff in this episode, like the stuff with Adira and Stamets and the stuff with Saru, Tilly, and Burnham, I spent more time discussing that than I did actually discussing the main plot, the like escape plot of the episode, which probably should go to tell you, like, I didn't find all that compelling. I don't find anything egregious about that storyline. There's nothing here I can like nitpick or say like, I didn't like that, like I did last episode with the stuff with Non, which I was a bit confused by and didn't really get how that plot totally wrapped up really neatly. Here, I don't have any problems with it, but I don't really have anything much to say about it either. So everything else in this episode I think was top-notch and gave me some really meaty character stuff and really good ideas to delve into. But the main instigating plot of this episode was like, it's fine. It's okay. It's cool. So that's that's my thoughts on this episode. What did you think, though? I'd love to hear all your thoughts down in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more reviews of Star Trek Discovery and more other Star Trek things that I do, or my reviews of The Mandalorian, which come out every Saturday as well. And that's pretty much everything. So I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Thank you so much to all of my patrons, especially Catherine Lambeth, Ashley Allen Bokikio, Miranda Janelle, Eli Berg-Moss, Ashlyn Solstice, Greg Gillum, Stephen Kleinard, Randy Thompson, Chamomile Tea, Philip Sorbello, Munir Amlani, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Stephen Schuthart, Wellington Marcus, Wayne Twitchell, Buttoneer, Ish the Mad, Dominic Noble, John Steele, Gavin Robinson, Michael Beam, William Stewart, Nathan Olson, Amanda Ronnie Indange, The Suspense, BBD, Hannah F., Miguel Posadas, Jason Knott, Maeve, Andrew Jorgenston, Sabraxis, Jasmine, Chris Brown, Bree Beecher, Nathan Steele, Chloe Dollar, Jane Packard, Dante St. James, Wendizzle Bizzle, Geek Filter, Mark the Edge, Pissed and Twisted Garage, Gretchen Badger, Sarah Bystam, Celestial Dawn, Polly Mina, Din, Jean Mithoon, Lysa, Andrew Lamoureux, Zone 1 Librarian, Michael Hardy. Thank you, all of you, especially this month.